I moved to Greenville, Tennessee about 55 years ago. And having lived here, I tried to learn as much as I could about the 17th President, Andrew Johnson. And what I learned about him and what I was hearing the pundits say on national television did not match at all how he was the worst president ever. What I learned was a man that had been an indentured servant, fled servitude at 14 years old, came across the mountain and got as far as Greenville, Tennessee. This man was illiterate, but he had been an apprentice tailor. He dated the town librarian who taught him to both read and write, and went on to hold every elected office in America. Now think about that for a moment. You start with an alderman for the town of Greenville. You move to mayor. You move to state legislator, state senator, territorial governor, U.S. legislator, U.S. Senate, vice president, president, and the only president to go back into the Senate after having been president. As I stacked up those facts, I decided that I would commission this film to determine what kind of man Andrew Johnson really was. And I think we're going to determine that this man was a significant president and perhaps stopped the Second Civil War from happening. And so I'm very, very delighted that we've taken this task on to prove and clear Andrew Johnson's name.
On the evening of April 14th, 1865, President Abraham Lincoln and his wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, along with a bodyguard composed of Major Henry Rathbone and his fiancée, Clara Harris, arrived at Ford's Theater on 10th Street in Washington, D.C., just blocks from the White House. It was Good Friday. They were there to watch, from the flag-draped presidential box, the performance of the comedy play Our American Cousin, a popular British farce that poked fun at stereotypes of rustic Americans and the British aristocracy. Perhaps the president needed some comic relief from the stress of war, as hopeful news had just appeared in Washington the day before, signaling an end to the horrible Civil War through which the country had suffered for 4 long years. Only 5 days before, on Palm Sunday, April 9th, General Robert E. Lee surrendered his Confederate Army of Northern Virginia to Lieutenant General Ulysses S. Grant, commander of Union armies, in the McLean House at Appomattox, Virginia. General Grant, who had been known through much of the war as Unconditional Surrender Grant, had offered merciful and generous terms to General Lee and his army as conditions for surrender. Those gestures of reconciliation were measures both commanders hoped would help end the hostilities felt on both sides of the bloody, costly war. The terms of parole allowed the soldiers to go home and remain unmolested as long as they agreed not to fight further. They were free to apply for pardons. By 10:15 in the evening of April 14th, 1865, the comedy Our American Cousin was in its last act. Actor John Wilkes Booth, a frequent performer at Ford's Theater, had managed to situate himself just outside the door of the presidential box. Incredibly, Booth got inside the presidential box without being challenged, and there he leveled his pistol at the back of the president's head and pulled the trigger. President Lincoln slumped in his chair. He had been fatally shot. Booth then jumped out of the box and onto the stage below, yelling,
"The South is avenged. Sic Semper Tyrannis!
He then escaped by scrambling out the rear entrance to the theater. The mortally wounded President Lincoln was taken across the street to the Peterson family boarding house, where he died at 7:22 in the morning of April 15th, 1865.